When the temperature increases in the upper tidal zone, the crabs in the area begin to think, "What shall we do?" and scuttle on over to the lower tidal zone to find a better place to inhabit. The crabs in the lower tidal zone notice the intruders and get a little crabby. They start brandishing their claws at each other until the intruders are scared off. Due to changes in temperature of the two crab species' climate, it is possible that an increase in heat would drive P. sink types to a lower intertidal zone already occupied by P. manamaculus. The effects that the effect that such a migration would have on the crab's behavior was unclear, so an experiment was designed to provide more information on the impact of competitive interactions on CSR. In this case study, performed in 2015, two kinds of adult porcelain crabs, P. sink types and P. manamaculus, were put under surveillance for environmental studies to see how competition affected their cellular responses and how interspecific interactions changed the genes of the individuals. Coming from different intertidal zones, they act out aggressively towards one another when in close contact.
Cellular stress response. Range of molecular changes that cells undergo in response to environmental stressors. Competitive interactions. Organisms competing for resources. Can be interspecific or intraspecific. Heterospecific. Belonging to a different species. Fundamental niche. Entire set of conditions in which an animal can survive and reproduce. Realized niche. The part of the fundamental niche that an organism occupies due to limiting factors in the environment. Each crab was contained with the same species, and the containers for the species shared water flow. 5 crabs were selected, with one marked as the focal crab, and the others were randomized, and their interactions were reserved for an hour. The number of times agonistic behavior between the focal crab and another crab occurred, such as antennal taps, where one crab directs an antennae toward the other crab, were observed and recorded. The containers that were observed for an hour had either one crab species member with 4 from the other species, 5 from one species, or just one crab in solitary. The non-focal crab in each trial were not involved in any other trials for 2 days. The focal crabs were frozen and ground up so that their total DNA could be extracted to test for CSR effects. It was found that there was no correlation between the focal species of the crab and the number of interactions observed. There was a correlation found between the type of interaction and the number of agonistic behaviors. As shown in the graph, heterospecific had around 90 observed interactions, while conspecific had around 60 observed interactions.
Gene expression of PC1 and PC2, which are genes that respond with CSR due to temperature, had no relation to the amount of interactions. CSR was not increased during these short interactions. From this graph, we can see that the number of agonistic reactions is not related to the gene expression of PC1, and similar results were shown for PC2. The crabs were shown to have higher levels of aggression in heterospecific interactions, which would explain why the two species inhabit the different intertidal zones despite not being physiologically limited to living in their respective niches. While the agonistic behaviors shown in the experiment provide an explanation for the lack of intermingling between the species, there was no evidence to suggest that the interactions led to increased cellular stress. It is possible, however, that the exposure to these agonistic behaviors for a longer duration would cause an increase in cellular stress, as the crabs in this experiment were only exposed to each other and observed for an hour.
Okie dokie. The fundamental niche of P. sink types is between the upper and middle tidal zones. P. manamaculas live in the mid to lower tidal zone. The two species can both tolerate the conditions in the middle tidal zone. The species instead occupy a realized niche of only the upper or lower tidal zones in order to avoid conflict. Both species are capable of living in conditions beyond the realized niche, but they occupy a subset of that range because competition occurs between the crab species in the middle tidal zone. The competition manifests in agonistic behaviors, such as those observed in the experiment.
According to Solomon and colleagues, the mean interior ocean temperature has increased by greater than 0.1 degrees Celsius per decade since 1961. Further or unexpected increase in temperatures could force the P. sink types into a lower tidal zone, but the agonistic interactions would prevent this, causing problems for the crab species.